Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. And what I want to talk about today is about XML and JSON. And XML and JSON kind of fill this very particular slot. How can one web application send information to another web application in a way that it can use to do things with? In the sense that, let's say you wanted to grab from a database of let's say you wanted to grab from a database of what's the word I'm looking for? Episodes of Family Times or Family Tides. Okay. Well, here's the thing. You may want it to look on your website a different way than somebody else does, but you both want the same information. So you have a source that develops what's called an API. Okay, an application programming interface. Really, it just means you're pulling just the information from the application. Okay, an API is a type of web application. So most people think all web applications are websites, where you see a visual website and there's HTML and CSS. An API is a different type of application that just serves data. It can sometimes receive data, but it's all not visual. Now, once upon a time, when these APIs would send data, they would send data in a format called XML. XML looks a lot like HTML. So let's say I were to create a thing. Let's say we were talking about family ties. So we would have an episode. Okay. And this is part of a larger list of episodes. Okay. And, you know, every episode would have a title. And we'll say like a release date. Okay, and then that would be one episode. And then we'll just say, you know, title here, date here. Okay, and then there'd be, again, a list of episodes. So what happens is that there'd be like several episodes in one episode. Okay, and let me just do this like this so it becomes a little bit more visually makes more sense. Let's do it this way. C. Okay, that makes the shape of the data a little bit more obvious. Now, here's the problem. Every time you have a character, you're taking up space, and that means what information you're transporting to another computer is bigger. Okay, and so the problem with XML is that, look here, I had to write episodes twice. So episodes gets written twice. For each individual episode gets written twice. For title gets written twice. So while this is, you know, makes sense, you can see sort of how we're structuring the data and identifying our data here. Okay, we can see that this creates a lot of extra characters, which means a lot larger raw data. And then what you would do is you would then parse it when you receive the data and use it. Okay, and you could parse this into a JavaScript object per se. But it's like, why not just send data that looks like a JavaScript object? And that's called JSON. So this is XML. So let me just put that XML. Okay. Now let's talk about JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It's just another way of denoting data. Okay, the idea here is we're just trying to figure out sort of a good way to send a string of data to another place. Okay, cool. So JSON would look more like this. It looks a lot like a JavaScript object. The only difference is that there's quotation marks on everything, keys and values. So this same okay, this same amount of data would look like this. You would have episodes. Okay, and episodes that have quotation marks around it. So it looks a lot like a JavaScript object. So then that would take that's a key, then there's a value. The value is an array. Okay. And the first item in that array is another object. Okay, and that, which would be one individual episode. And there, each episode has a title. And then the title would be title. And then there would be the release date. Okay. Release. Okay, and then, you know, you'd have many of these episode objects. So let's copy a few of them here. And this is essentially the same thing as this, except there's a lot less characters being used. Okay, title's only being written once, and then here's the actual value of the title, and then here's release. I never even had to write the word episode, because we just know that every object in this array is one episode. So we just have an array of episodes. Okay, so it's a much more compact way of sending over information, which is why JSON has become the sort of the standard format for sending data. And because we use JavaScript so much in the front, in the web development, it just makes sense that the way you send information over the web looks a lot like JavaScript. It's just going to be more intuitive. Okay, again, the difference between this and just normal JavaScript objects is all the keys have quotations as well. Keep that in mind. JSON always has the keys around, quotations around the keys. Okay, so that's the difference between XML and JSON. Now, let's see here. Let me create a folder. Okay, we're just going to call this fetch in the console. Now, the fetch API, which is something that's built into browsers, isn't built into Node. So in order for me to use fetch, just to kind of show you pulling in JSON data, new file. Just call this index.js. Okay, I am going to have to open in terminal. I want to open this folder in terminal. I do need to use Node. So I'm going to type in npm init-y. That creates an npm project, or a Node project inside my folder here, fetch console. Okay, I guess it's time for me to update npm. I'll do that later. And the next thing I want to do is I want to download, I want to install, so npm node package manager install, I think it's called fetch, if I remember right, fetch node. Yep. And just what it does, it just creates a version of fetch that you can use inside Node. So that works the same exact way. Good, so now I can use fetch. So a nice website for this purpose, okay, is I want to use JSON placeholder. It just has basically dummy JSON data that you can use. Okay, and see, like JSON looks like that. Okay, so let's take a look at there. Let's go back to the main page. Here we go. So you have all these endpoints that you can use here at JSON placeholder to practice. So I'm going to choose photos, and see, you can see the JSON data there already. So there's the JSON data, and I'm just going to grab that. Grab the URL. And go back to VS Code and just do fetch okay. Now if I do this, it's not going to do anything, because fetch, all it does is return a promise, which doesn't put anything onto the screen. So if I just run this right now, index.js, and I actually got to import fetch first. So when you're using Node, we got to require things that we bring in. So I'm going to do const fetch equals require node. What did I install? Fetch node. Okay. Hopefully it's the same thing. Okay. Now let's use this. Well, I just typed in node index.js. Run the file. Cannot read property render of undefined. Let's see here what I did do here. I think I imported the wrong library. So npm install node fetch. I think that's what I wanted. Let me just change this to node fetch. Yep, that's what I want. Okay. So see, it didn't do anything. Because what happens is that there's a promise, it resolves. That's how this works in JavaScript. So what's going to happen is really all I'm receiving is this raw set of characters that's referred to as a buffer, okay, in JavaScript. And I can't really do anything with that. Or it's actually referred to as a readable stream in this specific situation. I can't do anything with that. That's how fetch works. It doesn't give me back text. It doesn't give me back a JavaScript object. It just gives me back this readable stream of data that I can't do anything with. I got to turn it into something. So always with fetch, I got to do a second step. So I'm going to take the response. We'll call it response with a dot then. And I can either turn it, I can do response.text, and then I'll actually turn it to text. And then I can take that, what that gives me, and do it another dot then. So we'll just say result equals console.log results, just so we can see what that does. So now if I do that, I should just end up getting a big text string that's all the data. And see, it's just one big text string, not a JavaScript object. But if I were to use the JSON function on the response, then I want to get back a JavaScript object. And see, it turns all that string of data that came in into an actual JavaScript object we can then use and do whatever we want with it. Okay? So that's all JSON is. It's just a way to send data from one place to the next. So there's all these APIs out there where you can just grab data. Like there's a Star Wars API, there's ice cream APIs. You can find an API for any data you want. And you can just bring it into your application and use that to make whatever you want. Okay? And yeah, make use of use the data from another application. This is basically how you're able to log into multiple places with Google, because basically what's going to happen is that they'll use an API created by Google to be able to check your login credentials, and you'll be able to log in out of websites that are not Google with your Google credentials. Okay, they're just giving them a way to access the data that exists in another application. That's what APIs do, and JSON is a standard way to send the data between applications. It's just a format of how the data looks like to minimize the number of characters that became popular as JavaScript became more popular. So that hopefully gives you a little bit more background on what JSON and XML are and their role in the JavaScript world. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.